Welcome to episode 16 of Celtic Sagas and Lore. In this episode I'd like to do some death omens in Celtic mythology and lore, and a story as well, which is quite unusual. In Celtic mythology, death was very prevalent, as you can imagine. The ancient Celts lived a hard life. The two most prominent sources of death omens in the Gaelic culture, you have the Banshee, which translates as woman of the mound. Now she appears as either an old withered woman, referred to as the hag, or sometimes as a young beautiful woman in green, and she will be either keen or weep for the soul about to depart. In the more Brittonic, the Welsh and Cornish, you have the corpse candle, which was said to be a light, white light which would float near the home or area of the home to the person that was about to die. They probably are linked, but during All Hallows Eve, the origin of the pumpkin was way that, shall we call them, rogues would put a candle in a pumpkin and put it in a place to scare people with, lest they were out late at night. Story I have is somewhat unusual. In Celtic mythology, Welsh mythology mainly, the most fairy maidens of the human variety are normally associated with lakes, but there's one unusual story, and there's a few variations of it. That is the Lady of the Mountaintop Mist. Now, depending on which version you hear, so I'll just do a generic version. There once was a farmer that was injured during a war, or in other versions he was deformed in some way. Normally a hunchback is the most common form. And though he was disformed, he was had a great kind heart, and due to deformity and or his injury, he was not cruel or unkind, but just kept himself away from other people, and he'd be the first one to help you with any problems in the farm, whatever. But then again, he would not interact with people, and so people obviously kept their distance from him. And this one particular story, he was been tending his flock on the hillside, and he lived under a mountain which was always covered in mist. And one evening at sunset, he was coming home from the flock, and he noticed that there was a light in his cottage. Thinking it's strange, he walked in, and he saw the most beautiful maiden had come in and had cleaned the house and prepared him food. And he fell instantly in love with her, and he begged her to marry him, and she refused, saying that her time was only short and she could not stay. This is quite common in Celtic mythology. If you remember back to the episode of the fairy flag of the MacLeods as an example. But he begged her to marry him and to stay with him. And she said, "I will stay with you until my sisters call for me." Now, of course he was overjoyed by this news, and he stayed with her, and they were happily married. She did not reveal anything about herself to him or anybody else, but she was devoted to him and he was devoted to her. It's a classic love story. They went on to have 2 sons, and they were happily married. Then one fateful evening, it was dark and the mist was rolling down from the mountain, and the farmer was slowly sitting having his dinner. The children were playing by the fire, and she was in the rocking chair weaving. And all of a sudden she perked her head up and says, "Can you hear that?" And he said, "What?" And the children looked up as well. She said, "My sisters are calling." So he was there thinking, what's the notice of that? So she suddenly just got up, wrapped her shawl around her, and went out into the night. He quickly grabbed the lantern and followed her, and he was calling her name, which is normally Helen, or the Welsh Elen, the Welsh version, which might tie in with the goddess legend of the Helen, is obviously Helen of the Ways, which is a Celtic earth goddess. And he called and called to her, and she said, "Please stay with me." She said, "I can't." I said, "When my sisters called, and they are calling," she pointed up, and he could see 6 maidens in the mist in a ghostly type shape. And she said, he said, "Then let me come with you." She came back and held his cheek and said, "Not yet, my love, it is not your time." And with that he was paralysed and could not move, and she then went into the mist, and with a calling of her sisters she went to the mist, and the mist rolled back up to the mountain, and he was heartbroken. He lived to a ripe old age, and one day he was fixing a dry stone wall with one of his sons, and he said, "Can you hear that?" And his son said, "What?" And suddenly he clutched his chest and looked up at the mountain. His son ran off to get his brother and their wives to carry him back to the cottage. And they came back. They saw that his hand was outstretched to the mountain, and there was a smile on his face. They knew that their mother had come back for him. And the story is called Cariad Elen, and it is quite well known in Welsh circles. So I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope to see you in episode 17. Thanks for listening.